Welcome to this explainer. You know, we live in an era where we're literally more digitally connected than at any point in human history. Yet somehow, we're simultaneously facing an absolute crisis of disconnection. Today, we're unpacking the mechanics, and more importantly, the cures for loneliness. Let's dive right into this. Look at this number, 871,000. The World Health Organization's Commission on Social Connection recently put out a flagship report, and it revealed something totally staggering. They estimate that 871,000 people die every single year because of loneliness. To put that into perspective, that's roughly 100 deaths every single hour. This completely shifts how we need to think about loneliness, right? It's not just some fleeting, sad emotion. It is an undeniable, lethal physical threat that demands our immediate global attention.
So, to map out the cures for this crisis, we're going to cover a global health emergency, how we cope, designing out loneliness, the low-tech lifeline, and finally, building a connected future.
Okay, Section 1, a global health emergency. Let's look at the true scale of the crisis. Now, just to make sure we've got the right vocabulary as we move forward, let's clearly define the difference between two terms that honestly get confused all the time. Loneliness is that subjective, internal pain. It's the feeling of a gap between the social connections you want and the ones you actually have. I mean, you can be in a crowded room and still feel deeply lonely. Social isolation, on the other hand, well, that's an objective physical state. It simply means a measurable lack of social contacts. Both of these are incredibly dangerous, but they're fundamentally different mechanisms.
You know, we often see loneliness painted as this very modern, Western, first-world problem. But the WHO data absolutely shatters that myth. Just look at this. Loneliness affects nearly 1 in 4 people in lower-income countries. And furthermore, while it affects people of all ages, it's actually most common among adolescents and young adults. We're talking about roughly 1 in 5 experiencing it globally. So this just proves that this is a deeply global, cross-generational issue. It's everywhere.
And this is exactly why the WHO is treating this as a full-blown emergency. Loneliness doesn't just make you sad, it operates like a severe physical disease. I mean, chronic loneliness directly triggers life-threatening conditions. We're talking about significantly increased risks of cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes, right alongside devastating mental health impacts like severe depression and anxiety. It literally drains the physical health of communities and the economic health of entire nations.
Moving on to Section 2, how we cope. We're going to look at some really surprising behavioral shifts.
So when we're feeling disconnected, our very first instinct today is usually to just reach for our phones, right? Well, an interesting study on adolescence in the Malaysian Journal of Medical Research reveals a critical nuance here. It's actually not just about screen time, it's about the type of use. Active social media use, things like messaging friends, posting updates, engaging in direct emotional expression, that actually promotes genuine social connection. But passive use, that mindless scrolling through feeds without ever interacting, that directly fuels anxiety, depression, and even deeper isolation.
Now, the really crucial point here is how loneliness alters not just our digital habits, but adult consumer behavior as well. Research highlights this totally fascinating psychological shift. When people from individualistic cultures feel lonely, they'll actively use affection for corporate brands to artificially fill their emotional voids. Basically, because they lack real human connection, their brain compensates by generating a heightened brand love for physical products. Crazy, right? Interestingly, though, collectivistic consumers don't show this same artificial bonding at all. It really goes to show how deeply our cultural frameworks dictate our coping mechanisms.
All right, Section 3, designing out loneliness. Let's talk about the architecture of isolation. What if loneliness isn't just in our phones or our shopping habits? What if it's literally built into the concrete of our environment? To answer this, we're looking at a fascinating spatial study published in Frontiers in Public Health. Researchers analyzed 297 university students across campuses in Nanning, China. They really wanted to understand if the urban built environment, the actual physical layout of roads, shops, and parks, engineers or alleviates student loneliness. They mapped data within a 1,000-meter walkable radius of the campuses just to see exactly how spatial design influences human psychology.
I want you to think about your own neighborhood for a second. You might assume that being surrounded by bustling shops and high-density mixed land use would make you feel way more connected, right? Actually, the study found the exact opposite. High land use mix and a dense concentration of shopping and dining facilities actually increase loneliness. Why? Because they cause sensory overload, noise, and social fragmentation. On the flip side, dense road networks and easy access to public transport drastically lower loneliness by promoting physical movement, active travel, and better access to genuine social destinations.
To prove this, the researchers used this sophisticated statistical method called geographic detector analysis to measure exactly how powerful these urban features really are. And the results? Totally staggering. Access to tourist and leisure attractions, proximity to healthcare facilities, and the overall land use mix each scored an explanatory power of 0.999. In simple terms, this means these built environment factors have a massive, statistically undeniable impact on how isolated or connected these students feel on a daily basis.
This brings us to Section 4, the low-tech lifeline. Let's look at some clinical efficacy.
We've looked at high-tech and high-density urban spaces, but now let's zoom in on a beautifully low-tech human solution. The Heal Hoa trial out of Hong Kong, which was recently highlighted by the Beck Institute, asked a really important question about brief remote interventions. They looked at a highly vulnerable population, adults aged 65 or older who were living alone, facing financial hardship, and experiencing digital exclusion. Basically, they couldn't just jump on a Zoom call or use a social app to connect. They needed a lifeline that was accessible, scalable, and genuinely effective.
As Dr. Judith Beck points out in this quote, loneliness is largely maintained by social withdrawal and unhelpful cognitive patterns. And what does that mean for us? Well, it means we can treat this issue just like we treat other cognitive behavioral challenges. It completely removes the societal stigma of loneliness, allowing us to treat it as a standard, highly curable health condition. It's a real game changer.
And the elegance of the solution is just incredible. They didn't bring in expensive psychiatrists. Instead, they trained lay counselors. They delivered cognitive behavioral therapy, specifically focusing on behavioral activation and mindfulness, over just 8 30-minute traditional telephone calls spread over 4 weeks. And the results? Absolutely amazing. A massive, statistically significant and sustained reduction in loneliness that lasted for a full 12 months. It drastically improved sleep, reduced anxiety, and boosted overall life satisfaction. Just 8 simple phone calls?
Finally, Section 5, building a connected future. Let's synthesize some systemic and personal solutions.
To combat this at scale, the World Health Organization has mapped out these 5 strategic action areas. They're really pushing to formalize national policies because, honestly, currently very few countries have dedicated loneliness strategies in place. They aim to scale up the exact kind of effective interventions we just saw in Hong Kong, improve global data tracking, and formally demand that social connection be aggressively resourced as a foundational global public health priority.
As we wrap up this explainer, the data makes one thing absolutely abundantly clear. Connection doesn't always just happen by accident. It requires deliberate design, both at a systemic level and an individual one. So I want to leave you with this thought to chew on. When you look at your passive screen time, your consumer habits, and even the literal layout of your neighborhood, how are you purposefully building your own social connections in the environments you navigate every single day?